Time next for Entre Nous, and in today's segment, we're focusing on Company, the Broadway musical that's getting its French debut. The show by Stephen Sondheim premiered in Broadway in 1970. Company is a series of vignettes centered around Bobby, a 35-year-old single New Yorker who's trying to find his place around his married friends. Here's a sneak peek from rehearsals last night. And we're pleased to welcome the director of Company, James Bonas. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, Sondheim is a musical theatre great, but he's little known here in France, yet your show is already sold out. Is France ready to discover Sondheim?
I think France has been discovering Sondheim over time. Jean-Luc Choplin, when he was in charge of the Châtelet, programmed a series of Sondheim shows. They did Into the Woods, Sweeney Todd, A Little Night Music, and they were already proving very popular and successful. And now he's running Lido 2. They just did A Funny Thing Happened on the way to the Forum. And again, it's been very successful. So I think France is ready for Sondheim. And this project is really about taking one of Sondheim's greatest shows out of Paris and all around the country.
Company made its debut on Broadway back in 1970. There's been a 55-year gap since then. How do you approach it when making a debut production?
Sure, I think I'd say a couple of things. First is any really good piece of writing stands the test of time.
Really?
Yeah, whether it's a novel or a play or a musical. And in the show, all of his friends are kind of pressuring Bobby to get married. And obviously, nowadays, marriage is very different to when the piece was written. There's not the same pressure to get married. But really, the marriage in the piece is really about commitment. It's not about the actual marriage itself. It's really about how hard it is to allow yourself to trust someone else, to actually fall in love. And so that remains just as true now as it ever did.
This is a French cast who presumably did not grow up on Sondheim productions the way maybe American performers may have. Do you feel this helps bring a fresh perspective to the piece?
Yes, for sure. What I'd say is the people that we've got in the show are big music theatre lovers. So I think Paris's proximity to London, and there's already a lot of musicals happening here, but they've been watching shows in London or going to New York. But at the same time, they are bringing a fresh perspective, for sure. And at the same time, I decided to work with French and Belgian design teams. So we have a designer who's Belgian, French costume designer, French lighting designer, Moroccan-French video designer, to give a kind of different aesthetic to the show. The choreographer and I are both coming from the UK, but we really wanted to feel this production to feel like it was born in France and coming from France.
Given that Sondheim was this brilliant lyricist, a master at wordplay, yet you've chosen to translate the book but keep the songs in English, why did you take this approach?
So it was a decision for two reasons, really. The first was that one of the main goals of this production is to take Sondheim to a wider audience. And when you're speaking dialogue and speaking fast, the audience would spend most of the time, if we were doing it in English, looking at the subtitles,
Exactly.
the translation. Whereas when you're singing lyrics, it takes longer to get the text out. So actually, you can have time to read the subtitle and listen to the song. And also, people are familiar with the songs. So if they listened to a recording before, they'll be listening to it in English.
Now, Will, you mentioned this, you touched on this point about the show being supertitled in French. How did you approach the translation of the libretto for the supertitle?
So we've been working with a translator called Stéphane Laporte, who works a lot on shows here, doing work in translation. And we went through a series of drafts back and forth. He worked very closely with the Sondheim estate as well on the translation. And I have to say he's done an absolutely brilliant job. It's really clever and still captures the essence of the comedy and the relationships in the writing.
Tell me about the mission of Génération Opéra, because this is an opera company that's about discovering new voices.
Exactly that. And I think normally I think they did a Voyage dans la Lune, an Offenbach, or they've done some different pieces. And this time, I think Jérôme Gay, who runs Génération Opéra, together with the Châtelet, really wanted to kind of bring together a set of co-producers and introduce sort of top-level music theatre to a wider audience through the opera houses. So we're touring all around France to opera houses to show this piece to the widest possible audience.
Now, Génération Opéra is an opera company, not a musical theatre company. So are you approaching the show with a more operatic lens?
No.
Not at all?
No. The conductor is Larry Blank, who is an outstanding and extraordinary Broadway veteran. I mean, he watched the first premiere of Company when it opened. He worked with Sondheim as an arranger. He's had endless shows on Broadway and in the West End in London. And so he's absolutely kind of legitimate music theatre approach. And the choreographer, Ewan Jones, works a lot in musicals in the UK, across Europe, different places. So we're absolutely going at it as a musical. And yet we've got in the pit, there's a sort of 40-piece orchestra, which is incredible.
Are you surprised that the show has sold out?
No.
Not surprised.
It's nothing to do with me because I've not seen it yet.
Okay.
No, as in this piece, that's why we really wanted to do it. When this piece is done in the UK, it sells out every time it's done. And the same on Broadway. Because occasionally pieces of theatre come along that are so well written that if a chance comes to see it, people will really rush.
And the debut is you're premiering on Saturday night, and you run through when?
We run in Massy just Saturday and Sunday.
Okay.
And then we go to Compiègne next week.
Okay.
And play next Saturday, Sunday in Compiègne.
Okay, so you're taking on a little
Goes
tour.
on the tour, yeah.
Okay, James, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. And before we leave you, here's a final look at Company.